College Football Nerds here talking Penn State and Michigan. Hope y'all have had fun eating all your kids' Halloween candy. I know I have done that, and I'm not sorry about it. I want to remind y'all, Josh is here with me. We're going to get nerdy on this game. We're going to talk some numbers. We're going to talk some models. We're going to talk some positional matchups, some X's and O's. And that's about it. And I know y'all know that we've had our own opinions on the Michigan stuff. I'm not going to name it any more than that. And I just want to let y'all know that this game, this discussion, this preview is just going to be about the sport. We're just talking ball. We're not talking any off-the-field stuff. So if you're here for that, maybe a later video. But right now, it's just football. I know there's some stuff that might come out later this week. We're recording this early in the week. So just buckle in and let's talk ball. So, Josh, given how Penn State has been a little bit up and down offensively this year, and Michigan is a bit of an enigma given their schedule so far. Like, yes, they have done everything that's been asked of them, crushed everybody, but they really haven't played anybody. Their best win is Rutgers. So this is kind of fun because we don't really know what to expect, and this is actually a place where the model might be able to help us in terms of relative performance. But Josh, for me, and I know we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, I think Michigan's going to be okay offensively. I don't know if they're going to be great. The question for me is, can Penn State score at all? And that might depend on how much you think Ohio State's defense is elite versus merely good, because that's the one comparison we have maybe to Michigan's defense in this game.
I like how you said you start this off, and sounds like we're going to be positive and immediately start with whether or not Penn State's going to score at all. I mean, that's kind of where Penn State is as a football team, right? And it's also where Michigan's been as a defense. For all the noise going on in that game, the one thing the Purdue head coach said is he felt like Michigan had the best defense in the country. And I'll say when I was watching that game, really the only piece of amusement I got watching Purdue when they were on offense is there was this brief moment when I thought his name was Lard instead of Card, and the idea of the skinny white boy being named Lard I thought was funny. And then I remembered he was Hudson Card from Texas, and from there everything else was just kind of downhill from a viewership standpoint. There's not a lot of hope, right, if you're a Penn State fan, that this is going to be a high-scoring game. In our metrics, offensively, Penn State's pretty miserable. Relative performance, 56th. Passing the ball, 90th rushing the ball. I think the latter part is maybe the more surprising aspect if you're a Penn State fan, because it felt like going into the season, the run game was going to be the major strength. That hasn't panned out in a game-to-game basis. And I think it really comes down to the fact that teams don't really respect the pass. And we've talked this out a lot with a lot of different teams this year, that I think we've transitioned back into a world with college football, which is more pro-style, a little less RPO, which means teams are maybe hedging a little less, maybe being a little more aggressive in certain ways. And if you can't throw the ball consistently downfield, teams are more than happy to let you have your shots and miss them. And that's, in my opinion, has been the issue with Drew Allar. He can make any throw on the field. He can also miss every throw on the field. And there have been way too many games this season where I've watched Penn State and Allar has missed shots. I mean, and not deep shots even, though he certainly has, hit or miss those like everybody does. I don't know how many times I've seen a 10-yard out that isn't touched by the receiver. And when you do that at a frequent enough basis and you're a defense, hey, I can get my guy and let him, run man-on-man, single coverage, play off coverage, and just see if Allar will hit him. And if he does, great. I'll deal with the next play. And if he doesn't, now it's 2nd and 10 or 3rd and 10. And if I can stop their run game doing that, they're not going to have an offense. And that's the way people play Penn State. And even in the Maryland game, Daniel, right? I mean, Allar didn't have a great day. But what, like 7.1 yards per attempt? I know they put up 51 points. I know they threw 4 touchdown passes in that game. As a team, they threw for 6.3 yards per attempt. Those aren't great numbers, right? They've been an offense all season that when they put up big point totals, they've done it on the back of their defense, continually giving them the ball, letting them wear down an opposing offense, getting a lot of possessions. They haven't moved the ball consistently, and that's not something you want to see versus a defense at Michigan that's pretty darn good, right?
Yeah, and I think that I want to sort of caution people who are looking at who are looking at Michigan's schedule and saying they haven't played anybody, which means they can't, like, it implies they can't be good. We see this every year. Usually it's been with Clemson. It's been somewhat the case this year with Georgia. You have to not fall into that trap. And, defensively, you could have said the same thing about Penn State, I think, before they played Ohio State. You could say, well, they haven't played anybody. And it proved, even in that Ohio State game, they lost the game, but that defense was legit. And we're going to get into that later. But I think there's certain things you can expect from Michigan, and you can see with your eyes when they play some of these teams and how dominant they are, that they're going to get some of theirs regardless. And I think offensively and defensively, that's going to happen in this game. The question is, with both of these teams, you look at the number. Vegas has got, I think, 43.5 over under, 10.5 point favorite for Michigan. It's an interesting way to get there in terms of how Vegas sees the points going and all. But Josh, if you look at this number and you think about how maybe it doesn't get there, and these two teams are in a tight game in the fourth quarter, it's probably a situation where Penn State's defense has forced what I think is a good Michigan offense to hit some stall points.
Yeah, and the stall points question is kind of an interesting one because that's one of the biggest challenges in terms of projecting Michigan as a football team. To this point, Michigan has consistently scored 30 points or more in every game. They've scored between 30 and 52. And we often talk about with our model, it's not as simple as something that's just like points per drive, points per yard. It's a lot more complicated than that, but it's also just fundamentally different than that in how it approaches things. One of the things that can happen in our model is if a team is able to consistently score at a certain level, it does assume they're going to have that output against everyone. It's something that's made the model more accurate when dealing with certain high-power offenses in the past, when playing better defenses. It also makes it more accurate sometimes with offenses that are highly inefficient. Michigan right now exists in this realm where the model doesn't really have a data point to tell it that it can't score a ton of points. The problem with that is Michigan has some sort of tells that suggest that maybe this isn't a football team that's going to have the ability to scale at a very high level. And what are examples of that? Well, despite the fact that it's been a pretty weak schedule, Michigan is actually 97th in the country in plays of 30 yards or more. They only have 15. Now, they're really high if you look at 10-yard plays. They're pretty high if you look at 20-yard plays. They are very low when you look at 30-plus yard plays. This is a football team that has scored points by staying on schedule, by getting first down after first down after first down, and marching the field. It's also in large part why the red zone seems frustrating, because they're very good at getting to the red zone, albeit somewhat slowly, but when you constantly have to operate in the red zone, it gets hard to score, because the red zone is inherently harder to score in. And you really want to have points that come without reaching that red zone threshold, because those deep pass plays that ended up at touchdowns, those big runs, which defined Michigan last year, those are what make you a football team. And to be clear, right, we talked about last season that Michigan really wasn't going to be able to sustain themselves as a football team because they had so many explosive run plays, and we didn't think that was a sustainable thing. Michigan was 18th in the country in 30-plus yard plays last year. That was primarily due to driven by long runs. But it was a loud noise. But it was something that was happening on a consistent basis. This year, when you look at Michigan, they don't have that aspect to their offense. They aren't generating big plays at all, even on lesser competition. So when we start to model this out, which Daniel, we probably want to get to in a minute just because it furthers the rest of the discussion, you start to end up in this conversation of at what point, if you don't have explosive plays, do you not have enough production to continue to move the chains at the rate at which you do, right? Because, the difference between 4 yards per play and 6 yards per play in a team that has to continually move the chains can be gigantic, because it's often the difference between, if you get a stuff on first down and you go 4 yards, you punt. Stuff on first down, 6 yards, you get another first down and you keep going. So I think the realm in which Michigan's playing with is scarily small, at least on paper. And it's going to be interesting to see where they end up in this game and what happens if they get boxed into sort of a lower yardage total.
So, Josh, before we get in the model, one thing I want to note on this, because I know as you get in the model, you're going to see the numbers and you're going to start thinking about a score. And you talk about, or we talk about, how hard it is to project from a modeling standpoint a team that plays nothing but weak competition. Michigan fans just got triggered, but I'm about to say something nice about your team, so hang on. That isn't it's just a fact. They have played a weak schedule. It's hard also with the eye test to not be fooled. But here's one thing I know. Other than UNLV, where Michigan won 35-7 and was just, messing around, every opponent Michigan has played this year, Michigan was their worst loss. To me, that is one of the things that is hugely telling, because it's like, not only are you able to beat everyone on your schedule soundly, but you're so much better than everybody else they've played that you're beating them worse than any of these other teams. And we're talking about, 80 games, right? And so for me, that is a big, big data point in terms of like trying to bring data together in a situation where it can be a little bit fuzzy. But with that note, just wanted to put that in the back of your head while you get in the model. Go ahead with the model and we'll talk off of that.
Yeah, and to that point, right? I mean, they blow out Rutgers, and then Rutgers gives Ohio State all they want, right, in a game last week. So I think that stuff does matter. Like you said, it's not that easy to blow out even bad teams on a consistent basis. But we'll go ahead and get into the model, because I think it furthers the discussion. And this is, as you said, a really hard game actually to pick because of where Michigan's been at from a scheduling perspective. And the point total here, 29.8 to 18.7, is pretty darn close to the spread. I think it's currently at 10.5. That's right about where we got it. We're like a half point off, and there you're dealing with rounding error, right? Yards per play numbers are maybe a little closer actually than the scoring, which is something that I've been hinting at earlier. 4.96 yards per play for Michigan, 4.11 for Penn State. I think it's interesting how different the passing metrics are in spite of that. 9.8 yards per attempt for Michigan, 5.8 for Penn State. That really reflects the fact that Michigan is more of a run team. And that rushing yard per carry number, 1.9 yards per carry for Michigan, is pretty miserable, right? 2.9 for Penn State is also miserable, but those are low. But I'll note this, and I'm going to, I'll give the stat, Daniel, since I've already got it up, right? That yardage number for Penn State's run defense is not crazy. Penn State's run defense in our metrics is the number one run defense in the country. We often talk about elite defenses can hold you to 50-60% of your rushing average by the end of the year. That's where Georgia was, Alabama and their better teams, Clemson and their better teams. Penn State is currently holding teams to 40% of their rushing average. 4-0. 60% below. Since the opener against West Virginia, who only had 3.6 yards per carry, and much of that was in garbage time, they have not allowed a team, an FBS team, to have 3 yards per carry. Maryland had negative 51 yards rushing. Negative 3.2 yards per carry. And let me be clear. Maryland's negative yards per carry was higher than any positive yards per carry anyone's had since the West Virginia game. And even when you take out sacks, it was still negative. Penn State's run defense is phenomenal. And so it does make sense that the model thinks that Michigan is not going to be able to run the ball, because to this point, no one has. And I think the more curious point here is that Michigan is like 0.8 of a yard per play better. That's a notable number, maybe not catastrophically big, but the score total, 29.9 to 18.7, almost feels too high to me. And I don't know if that's just gut reaction or if it's just reflecting, again, the model's feeling that it seems like Michigan's going to score 30 points no matter what, because it hasn't seen a low point total data point. And our model kind of blinds itself a little bit. I don't know, it's a little bit. We do actually put some stuff in there to make the model understand what low and high bounds look like. There's a mix of stuff going on. It's not quite as blind sometimes as we make it out to be. But, it is a score that's pretty close with the spread, a score that indicates a struggle win, really, for Michigan. More of a game where Michigan probably puts it away in the fourth quarter in a game that's ugly for 3. But also a game where Penn State is, by and large, pretty impotent, which, again, tracks with how the Ohio State game would have gone.
So it's interesting to me, if you look at the model prediction, it's got Michigan with a whale of a passing yard per attempt number. And that rushing yard number is low, and it's looking at Michigan splits and saying they're a running team, right? They run a lot. Therefore, if we look at those numbers and those averages, then the running contributor to their points per drive, their overall offense is going to be low, which is going to bring their total down. But Michigan throws the ball pretty well, at least from a yards per attempt standpoint. They don't throw it a lot in terms of yardage, but it's not terrible. And Penn State's one issue defensively is passing. So if you look at our relative performance numbers, they're top 10 in everything except for passing yards per game. They're 47th. Passing yards per attempt, they're 60th. And they give 98% of their opponent averages in passing yards per attempt. The flip side of this, I don't think Penn State can pass their way out of a defense that can hold their run game down, which I think Michigan's can. But to your point, because it's a little bit ADD, but to your point about how good Penn State's run defense is, you had two running backs get 33 carries in that Ohio State game for Ohio State. Neither one of them broke 3 yards per carry. That's really good. But I don't think it's going to matter that much because I think Michigan is going to be able to pass their way out of their stall points. But I do think Penn State's defense is really good. I just think Michigan's a really good football team this year. Give me Michigan 27, Penn State 13.
I was really worried at the end there because my score's 27-17. If you'd said 17, I would have been angry. Just angry on principle as much as anything. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it really comes down to the fact that Michigan has the ability to throw the ball pretty well. I mean, Roman Wilson has turned into a good receiver for Michigan. We've seen that time and again. Now, there's some plays, there's like an end around to Samaj Morgan against Purdue, where you watch the opposing defense, and I'll be honest, that was a boundary corner and a safety that have no idea what they're doing. And he just runs down the sideline. That's not going to happen probably in this game. They're not going to have those sort of crazy passing plays. But they are going to have more than enough to continue to move the chains. And I think more importantly, I think this is a Penn State offense that's just going to flail. Because I do think the defense at Michigan is very good. And given how good they are and given how much Penn State struggled, it's just going to take 1 or 2 turnovers to put Penn State in an adverse situation. And they are simply not built to throw themselves out of a deficit. And I think that causes this game to run away a little bit from Penn State late. I do think it's a tough game. It's a close game. You know, people gave you a lot of grief last week for saying you wouldn't be shocked. I think you picked LSU to win, but you said you wouldn't be shocked if Alabama won by 3 touchdowns.
Correct.
And they're like, what kind of a pick is that? It's a pick that reflects the fact that depending on how the game goes, this can get away from one team. That there's a clear avenue where if the wrong thing happens, it could get away. And from Michigan's perspective, if Allar is actually hot, and look, being hot and cold as a quarterback is a thing, then this can get away from Michigan. They don't want to be in a position where they're having to defend a Penn State passing game that's actually consistent, because that fundamentally changes the way this game plays out. And at that point, I probably start liking Penn State almost to win the game, frankly, because of his potential as a passer. And now you can say McCarthy's got a tremendous potential too, which is true. But Allar can theoretically push the ball vertical. We just haven't seen it, nor have we seen really from the receivers any sign of it. You know, they don't. Lambert Smith types aren't going to be guys that necessarily blow you up on the receiving end, or haven't proven to historically. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I think it's going to be one that Michigan wins. I think it's going to be one Michigan wins fairly comfortably, at least in terms of final score. And it's something that kind of informs us more of who Michigan is as a football team. You know, there were a couple years ago that, and I'll take the fall for this, you know, or both of us did because we kind of misremembered it, right? Having the discussion of a Michigan-Penn State game, I guess it was last year, right?
It was last year, yep.
We said it wasn't as close. Really was kind of close at half, and it really wasn't. And I could see that one being the same way, right? Where it's kind of close in terms of score, but Michigan's actually moving the ball way better because they actually have a functional passing attack, and Penn State doesn't. That's what this pans out as. And that's one where we just kind of misremembered in the moment, which, there's a lot of games and a lot of teams. Frankly, we get some stuff wrong sometimes. And there was some truth to it, but maybe certainly not to the extent of how we said it at the time.
I think it was more forgivable than you last week saying that Duke was never in the Notre Dame game this year when Notre Dame had to complete a pass with 30 seconds left on fourth down, or they were going to lose.
I conflated the first half of that game with the Louisville game in its entirety in my head. They were the same game.
People are calling on this late, and I had to get you on that one because I let it go in the comments, but I knew they were going to get you. But that one was fun.
Yeah, we guys, we do these lives usually in one take, so
yeah,
our ability to remember stuff, sometimes we get it wrong, and it'd be great if we had time to sketch all of this out and re-record, but we don't with our lives, so we do what we can because it seems like you guys enjoy the content.
So let me bring this back. Let me bring this back to one point that I made earlier that I want you to kind of lean on, because I want to get your opinion on JJ McCarthy a little bit. I just ran our numbers through so we have a player simulator that's part of our model. It's a little bit below the model, so you may not see it, but you can pick any player and see what their numbers will be projected to be based on their relative performance, how many reps they get in a game, like running backs, percentage of carries for their team and all that, and it runs it through their ratio, their offensive ratios. It predicts it predicts that sorry. I just blanked out. It predicts that no Michigan running back is going to break 3 yards a carry, and it's got Donovan Edwards at 2.2 yards per carry, Blake Corum at 2.5 yards per carry. This is exactly what happened last week versus Purdue, and Purdue's not a great defense, don't get me wrong, but you had Blake Corum, 2.9 yards, Donovan Edwards, 2.6 yards. JJ McCarthy threw it 37 times, 9 yards an attempt, 335 yards. Josh, do you think if Penn State holds Michigan to below 3 yards per carry, and remember, Penn State does get after the quarterback, which means you're going to have sack yards as well, so no running back hits 3 yards a carry. Is J.J. McCarthy that guy, in your opinion, that Michigan can still hit 27 to 30 points?
Currently, I would say yes, but this is the test game for that.
I think that's fair.
We both felt like all year, right, that he was kind of running under the radar. People didn't really want to accept how successful he had been, what his metrics really look like. First-year starter last year, hadn't gotten enough credit. But the opposing defenses have been bad. And now the hidden point here, as we've said, is that Penn State's pass defense isn't actually stellar. It's above average, but only just. It's their run defense that's great. However, the difference from them and a lot of other teams like Purdue was selling out to stop the run. Penn State can stop the run in much more balanced looks and actually play them more straight up against the pass. And what was really jarring to me watching Purdue play Michigan, again, I mentioned that Samaj Morgan play, how much they were playing just straight cover zero or insane cover one concepts where the safety was completely out of the screen deep, and they were just straight man everywhere else and putting everybody else they could on the line of scrimmage because they could not stop the run game otherwise, and they were just going to see if McCarthy could beat them with their arm. This is going to be a little bit of a different game, I think, in that regard. I mean, Penn State's going to be able to play them much more straight up. And that makes, from a read perspective and a quarterback operational perspective, things way more challenging, which I think sometimes people miss, right? When you're facing guys playing tight man coverage, it's really easy to read things as a quarterback. You know where your man beater is, and you know you've just got to trust your guy to beat it. And it's see guy open, throw guy open, because there's not all these safeties and linebackers floating around in zone coverages and robber coverages. When you play teams that can stop the run more successfully, there's a lot more defenders floating in space, and it really speeds up the game, so to speak, for the quarterback, because now he's got to do a lot more stuff mid-play and even pre-snap, and it just makes a lot of things more complicated. So I do think he can get them to 27-30. I don't think he's going to get them to 40 points. But it's certainly a test to see where he's at as a quarterback. And to me, I really do feel like Michigan's very likely to win this game. At least 70% likely, 80% likely even. But I'm more interested to see how they look in doing so, because to me this is more of an evaluation from a playoff perspective. Because if I'm being completely honest, after the Ohio State game, I have cooled a little bit on Penn State. I think they're a good team, maybe even a very good team with a great defense. I don't know that they're a great team. They're too limited offensively, and when they hit high-level teams with good defenses, they're just going to shut down and not have a great chance to win. It's going to happen probably this Saturday, I think, against Michigan. But seeing how Michigan's offense does against that defense is going to be really telling to me forward, even in a Michigan win from a playoff perspective.
And this is the only thing I'll say about the off the field stuff. A lot of people are waiting for Michigan to suck now, thinking, oh, you can't steal signs and you're going to suck now. That stuff was for previous years. Michigan is still, this year, no signs, whatever. They're still an elite team. And I think that people are waiting for something to happen that's not going to happen this year based on not having signs or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll add, too, that Penn State, their defense is good enough that if Michigan is struggling offensively, people are probably going to jump to conclusions on why that is.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give enough credit to the fact that, maybe Penn State's just a really good defense.
And I think they are. All right, y'all. Let us know in the comments what you think this score is going to be, and we will get down there with you and let you know how you're wrong. Remember, collegefootballnerds.com. You can see this model. You can play around with the other player projections, relative performance statistics. Get on that pick 'em, the top 25. You can see our model ranking 1 through 133. It's out there as well. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.